Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot, welcoming you to our approximately 7,000 subscribers special. I don't know how close we are to 7,000 subs, but I was in the mood to do a longer episode, and it seems like as good an excuse as any. You guys voted in our community page that you wanted to see a full hour of all new Dogman stories in this special, so that's what we're going to give you. In fact, we're going to give them to you in one continuous, uninterrupted format. You won't see me again until the very end, when we'll explain to you how you can send us your cryptid encounters and how you can join our secret club. But before that time, we'll have told you 10 all new, never before heard, and allegedly true Dogman stories sent in by you, our viewers. Before we get started, we want to wish Moon Knight well. He had alerted me to the fact that he is in the hospital, so we're pulling for him to get out of there soon and get back to work. Let's list Moon Knight as our executive producer for this special episode. And please consider including him in your prayers or your kind thoughts or whatever that translates into in your world. Now, say goodbye to me for the next hour, as you're going to hear nothing but scary stories for that entire period. I hope you're comfortable and ready for some creepy stuff, because we're starting the show right now with an allegedly real tale we call Dogman Got Into My Basement. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had a Dogman in my house. We live in a home that technically has 3 levels, but we live in the center one. The top floor is just a low-ceiling attic accessible by a drop-down ladder, and the bottom floor is a basement we use for washer room, dryer room, exercise bike room, my grandfather's repair room / tinkering shop. We thought about putting a family room in down there, as some of our friends had in their houses, but it's just always cold in our basement. It never felt like a place to relax in. It was where you went to do necessary things that had to be done, and you would leave immediately afterward to go upstairs, where things were far more comfortable. And so one day, as I opened the door in the kitchen to walk downstairs to the basement and get some laundry out of the dryer, I heard a weird growling or grumbling sound. I got afraid that the water heater was going to blow up again like it had years earlier, so I flipped on the stairway light and took a few quick steps down to get to a place where I could see what was going on down there. The grumbling turned into an angry snarling, and I almost slipped down the stairs when I tried to reverse course once I saw it. There was some kind of a mutant bear man down the stairs. I didn't know if it was an actual animal in that split second, or if it was a psycho in a costume, but I knew it was dangerous, and I knew it was not a joke. Literally crawling back into the kitchen after I'd fallen flat on my face on the steps, I grabbed the kitchen counter to lift myself back up to a standing position. Turning to close the kitchen stairwell door behind me, I saw it, climbing the stairs curiously on all fours, smelling the air coming down from upstairs. It was not a bear. Its ears were like a dog, at least in the moments I viewed it. When my eyes met those of the dog monster, his lit up in anger, and I saw his teeth flash as I got the door slammed shut. It was not the strongest of doors, and there was only a little lock on the doorknob and a flimsy chain lock as well. I locked both. Then I put my back against the door, bracing myself for that Dogman to hit it. Which it did. I felt like my life was going to end like a scene in a Stephen King story, and it was both simultaneously terrifying and deflating. I had lived my entire life only to be the guy who gets eaten first by the monster in a horror movie. I mean, we don't even know how the dogman got into the basement yet, and already my character was getting taken out, you know? So I was pushing back on that door being pounded from behind, but I was also feeling down on myself and depressed at the same time. I'm one of those people who can't get out of their own way and just exist in the moment. I'm pretty sure that the door and I wouldn't have withstood much more pummeling from the screaming monster on the other side of that thin slab of plywood, but for whatever reason, the dog gave up on his attempt to come upstairs. I listened, but I couldn't hear anything. I was afraid to take my back off the door, and I remained braced for it to be hit from behind. I was envisioning the dogman going back downstairs so he could get a running start, then racing up the stairs to smash into it with all his possible force. I was more frightened in that moment than when it was actually pounding from behind. My heart was racing, and I was sweating as much as I was shaking, uncontrollably. Even though nothing happened for some time, I wasn't feeling any more certain that it was over. I grabbed the kitchen telephone and then went back to bracing that door as I called information and asked for animal control. When those guys arrived, I led them to the kitchen and drew out a map on a piece of paper of the layout of the rooms below. Grandpa's workshop, boiler room, exercise room, washer room, dryer room, and the various hallways connecting them. We waited around for a couple extra guys to show up. Then they went down there, wearing their protective equipment and armed with sedatives and whatever else. It was a good 40 minutes before they finally came up, giving us the all clear. They took me to a spot in the dryer room, all the way around in the front of the building. There was a corner in the very narrow room that we never used, and in fact, I would never even turn to look in that direction. In that darkened corner was a big hole large enough for a man to climb through, and it was leading down under the house. I was amazed by this. It was literally maybe 20 or 25 feet from the sidewalk. It was in the suburbs. What was I looking at, and where did it lead to? The animal control people dropped a penny into it and told me to listen. It fell for a couple or 3 seconds before clinging down on a hard bottom that sounded like stone or concrete. They recommended having the hole filled immediately, and they told me it looked as though it had been there for some time. They asked me if I had seen animals scat, or smelled urine, or if we had food storage units broken into, but we had not had anything like that happen in that basement at all. Still, they insisted that hole had been there for some time, and we likely had been getting visits from whatever this was for some time as well. I tried to quiz them on what they thought the animal was and found them extremely tight-lipped. They said they would have to see the animal for themselves, and in the meantime, I'd be wise to have that hole filled with stones and cement that same day. They left me an emergency number and told me to call them directly if anything should happen before the hole was filled, or if another hole should open. They kept trying to both insist that there was nothing out of the ordinary or strange or dangerous about this, while simultaneously urging me strenuously to fill the hole immediately. I called contractors and couldn't find anyone willing to come out that day, so I ended up driving around the edge of town and collecting rocks and small boulders from the forest area. It took me 2 days of making trips all over town to fill the hole up to the point where the rocks were only a few feet below the edge of the hole. I then bought a few bags of cement, and I poured a bunch of it down. It wasn't enough, though, as a lot of it seemed to be dripping down into the rocks. I went and bought more while that batch hardened and repeated the process until the hole appeared filled solidly. It's been 15 years since all of that happened. Well, in a couple of months it will officially be 15 at least. I still check that cemented up hole, and I still cautiously knock on it to hear if it still sounds solid. I've had nightmares of knocking on it and hearing it sound hollow, as though all the rocks beneath had been removed. Sometimes in the dreams I would run away, but in other ones, the dogman jumps up through that old hole. He grabs me and he brings me back down with him under the earth to the place where creatures like him come from. I'm not a fan of devil movies like The Exorcist or The Omen or any of the more recent ones. I can't even watch funnier devil movies like Hellboy. I'm really freaked out by the idea of monsters that live down in something like hell, some kind of underworld beneath us. After all, I don't really know what that monster was that I saw in my own home on that strange day. The only thing I know for a fact about it is that it is living underground in our neighborhood. I mean, I know that for an absolute fact. It definitely came from under our neighborhood, and it must be part of a species. It might even be under my feet even as I type these words. And it might have its entire family with it. And then, logically, a predator species must have a prey species, more likely many different kinds of prey species. And the prey must have plants to eat. So that one dogman I saw coming from a world beneath our home implies an entire ecosystem would logically also need to be down there, unless that hole was a portal to another reality, and it didn't seem to be that to me. Then the implication of all of this is that we know far, far less about this planet than we think we do. At least, that's the way I've been thinking about it since the day that Dogman got into my basement. Story 2. Chiller Theater Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a story I call the Chiller Theater Dogman, but it's actually 2 stories about 2 Chiller Theater Dogmen. The first story happened when I was with my cousin when I was a kid. The second story happened when I was completely alone as an adult along a creepy highway in the dark. Let's start at the beginning. I was at my cousin's place in a rich suburban house in New Jersey, surrounded by woods, on a hot summer night, watching The Brain Eaters on Chiller Theater on Channel 11. This would have been back in the early 1970s. They would have Chiller Theater double features on TV back then, and we were usually allowed to watch at least the first one. Then we'd go up to my cousin's bedroom to quietly attempt the second feature without keeping his parents up. They were usually cool with it as long as we let them sleep. School was going to be starting again soon, so they wanted to let us get the summer out of our system before we went back to the daily slavery of the public school system. We were watching The Brain Eaters in the family room on the main floor, which had a picture window looking out onto the lawn and the woods. My cousin, let's call him Gerald, kept looking out the window, saying he thought he was seeing something moving around out there. Whenever he looked directly at it, though, he didn't see anything. We got paranoid it was space aliens or something because the movie was helping to make us more frightened. I thought I saw something peripherally too, so during the next commercial break, we both lowered the sound on the TV and stared out that picture window into the dark night toward the forest. And as we stared out that window, absolutely nothing happened. We only seemed to be able to see the thing move when we were looking at something else. So, if we only saw it out of the side of our eye, we couldn't be certain we weren't seeing some sort of optical illusion caused by the leaves moving in the breeze or something like that. We figured there must be some explanation along those lines, and we went back to watching the movie. The thing is, the next time, we both saw something moving out there at the same time as each other. Going back to our positions by the window, we went back to staring at absolutely nothing moving in the slightest. There wasn't even much of a breeze out there that night, and we were both confused as to what we had been seeing. We really wanted an explanation for it, but we were finding none. And then we saw, quite clearly and directly in front of us, a man-sized, hairy, dog-headed, upright walking creature dart from behind one tree to behind another one. We both saw it at the same time, and we both stood up in shock at the same time. Then we both shouted, "Whoa!" at the same time, and then we both ran upstairs to his bedroom at the same time. I remember we ran into his room and locked the door as though the dogman were chasing us up the steps or something. It was illogical, but we were young, and I guess it gave us a false sense of security. We sat and stared out his bedroom window toward the area where we had last seen the dogman, but we didn't see him again. When we turned the movie on in his room upstairs, man, that was the most exciting horror movie viewing in my life. I felt like any moment the TV story might be interrupted by the dogman outside our window. And I remembered that the second movie was some vampire flick, so we became paranoid that a bat was going to come tapping on our window or something like that. That night, I had the wildest dreams I've ever had. Whenever life becomes boring and humdrum and I start to lose my sense of the world being inextricably strange and magical, I try to remember back to that night. To me, scary movies are inextricable from actual cryptid and paranormal events. I feel they are two sides of the same coin. Somehow, even real monsters are part of our imagination. I don't mean to say that Dogman and Bigfoot are imaginary. I'm saying they utilize our imagination to appear, and I'm also saying that we don't understand what our imagination really is or how powerful it can be. We also don't understand why we all imagine such similar things. There are reasons for that, but you would never understand until you begin to learn what imagination is and what a monster is. The second Chiller Theater Dogman story happened to me when I was driving home from the Chiller Theater Convention in New Jersey in 2015. That turned out to be Zachary final appearance. If you aren't old enough or East Coast enough to remember Zachary, he was my favorite horror host on TV when I was very young. Then he hosted Mighty Mouse cartoons, and he was a DJ on rock radio as well. I remember watching him before I remember anything from my personal life. He would put Jell-O in cheesecloth and shape it like a brain, then attach live electrical wires onto it, blowing it up on the show and setting it on fire. He'd save the Jell-O and put it in a dark bag, and then the next day, he'd host a rock music dance show on a New Jersey TV station, still dressed as a horror host. He'd invite a girl from the audience up to reach in the bag and get a special prize. Of course, it would be the rotten Jell-O from the night before, and she'd scream in horror as she felt it. Then old Zach would laugh his ass off as the girl ran away. He'd probably be in prison if he did a show like that today, but boy, we loved old Zachary. He was our hero and our idol. Seeing him in 2015 very old and clearly at the end of his life at that convention, I felt like I had just seen him for the last time, and I was overwhelmed with emotion on the drive home. Not all of it was sad, as Zach was funny to the end, and he always left me with a laugh and a sense of wonder. I drove home that night grateful for having been born into the right generation to have gotten to experience all the things I had. Mostly I was grateful for Chiller Theater, Creature Features, and Zachary. And then, out my window, there was Dogman all over again. While driving through the night on a dark local road near Edison, I saw a Dogman on the side of the highway, just standing there by the tree line, almost like a statue. Its eyes glowed like a cat photo taken with a flash on. It was the size of a tall man. It had a long tail, and it had pointed ears. The creature was various dark shades, but with white on its chest and neck. It looked like if Lassie had been mixed with a man and turned evil, or at least angry looking, as it seemed really seriously annoyed. It stared forward at something to my left that I couldn't see. It never looked at me, but I got the chills and a sense that I was in grave danger. I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could, and I tried to put my foot down through the floor of the car to get it moving faster. I just zoomed past the evil lassie man, feeling like it was going to jump out at me. I actually screamed in fear as we passed it. I was certain it was going to wait until I was nearest, then dart out and grab my car door or something like that. Have you ever been horrified and completely frightened by something, then still had to move forward closer to it before you could get away from it? Wow, that's hard because it's so counterintuitive. I really wanted to make a U-turn and head back away from the evil lassie, but I drove toward it instead, and I made it past it without the dogman making even the slightest move toward me. I tried to view it after I passed, but I couldn't see it there anymore. I'm not sure if it ran across the highway or if it returned to the woods. It all happened so fast, but it sure got my heart pumping, and I remember every split second of the experience as though it took up 10 minutes of time. It's true that time is not a linear thing, and it's also true that not all seconds or minutes are as long as each other. When Dogman is around, time slows down. He decides when his appearance is over. He can be in your life a total of 7 or 10 seconds, yet he can take up more of your memories than every birthday party you ever had all combined. I've had 12 girlfriends in my life and 2 wives. I've literally spent years with those women and less than 10 seconds with the Dogman. Yet, I can tell you more about the Dogman than I can tell you about any of those women. You may think I'm exaggerating or joking, but that's because you never saw the Chiller Theater Dogman. 3. The Paranormal Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story about the paranormal that is also about the Dogman. In my opinion, they are one and the same, and you'll understand why I feel that way after you hear my story. You might not agree with me, but I really do think that you would at least understand why I feel the way I do if you listen straight through to the end of all I have to tell you. First of all, it all started with a Dogman encounter on my back porch. Or, I should say my mother was on the back porch. She was living with me and my wife since my father had passed. My mom was shoveling the snow off the wooden porch, and according to her, she was approached by a man walking up to her through the snow with a dog's head. My wife and I were inside playing a video game, and we both ran toward the back door when we heard her screaming. I had never heard my mother scream like that before, but I would get more used to it over the next year or two. By the time we got to the door, Mom was back inside, screaming to us about what she had just experienced. What I remember her saying happened was that while she was shoveling, a man with a dog head walked up toward her, and she screamed at him to stop. She told him that she was a child of the Lord or some religious kind of thing, and that he should go back to whatever hell he came from. And then, according to Mom, he disappeared. Disappeared on the spot. Not faded out, not teleported, but he was there, and then he wasn't there. I told Mom to please lie down, and I'd do her shoveling for her. I thought she'd gone off her rocker from overwork, and I felt embarrassed because I'd been playing video games while exhaustion drove the old lady to insanity. My wife went inside with her. She completely believed Mom, and I'll get to why that was in a minute. When I asked my mother over the years to get into more detail than saying she just saw a man with a dog head, she keeps saying, well, that's what it was, a man with a dog head. When I ask, well, was he wearing clothes? Was it an animal that walked like a man? Was it fully human, other than the dog head? She gets frustrated with me and she asks me to stop bombarding her with questions. But you have to kind of understand the kind of person my mother is. Even when she was younger, she was already like this. For instance, when I would hear a funny joke from my friends at school, I would tell it to other people and usually get laughs with it too. I would practice retelling jokes and try to figure out why they were funny, if they should have a different ending, and so on like that. When I got the joke down so that I knew I could always get a laugh out of it, I would then try to tell it to my mother because she was the toughest audience of all. One time, I told her this funny story, and when I finally got to the punchline, I started saying it, and she interrupted me to say, "Shush, shush, shush, you're talking too loud." I asked her if there were a baby sleeping nearby or something, and she didn't understand what I meant by that. I tried telling her a joke another time, and as I began the punchline, she walked out of the room. Concepts have to be broken down very small for her to digest. If a story takes 3 sentences to tell, she'll move on to another version. So, for these reasons, I never really was made to understand whether she saw a werewolf, a dogman, a person in a costume, or any number of other things. The one fact about that event that still to this day makes my skin crawl and my hair stand on end is that my wife noticed and pointed out to me a set of tracks leading from the woods up to where my mom says the dog-headed man walked, and then the tracks just stopped there. It looked like something walked up to that spot bipedally, then just blinked out of existence, exactly the way she told us it happened. So, now back to why my wife believed my mom before I did. She, my wife, let's call her Wanda, had been asking me for some time if I had been seeing the glowing orbs that floated around the property. I had in fact not been seeing anything like that at all, but I told her I'd keep an eye out for them. I wasn't sure if she was serious or kidding, so I tried to play it straight. If she was joking, I'd figure it out sooner or later, but if she was serious, then I might hurt her feelings if I acted too flippantly about her small flying lighted up globes. The thing is, I had been experiencing my stuff being out of place. I found my car keys in the freezer one morning before I even realized they were missing. I found my electric shaver kit in the attic 2 weeks after I had bought myself a straight razor to use instead. There were other annoying events like that which I'm forgetting the details of. And then came the poltergeist and haunting events. We had a print of a painting of Reggie Jackson done by famous sports painter Leroy Neiman hanging on a wall over our TV. It flew off that wall onto the TV 3 times, and the 4th time it actually hit it so hard that the TV fell forward onto the floor. The plugs got pulled out of the back and it broke our DVR or DVD or however we had it set up back then. Photos of our family that we had on flat surfaces kept being turned face down onto the counters each morning. Cabinets in the kitchen we would close at night would be opened in the mornings. That sort of thing. At first I thought my mother was sleepwalking until she started to complain about this stuff as loudly as my wife and I did. One night, we were arguing about something, I can't remember what. It was all 3 of us arguing though. That was when I saw it. I saw the dog-headed man that my mother had seen. Yes, it looked like an animal, yet it stood like a man. Its body was thinner than I had envisioned, and its legs were bent backward, giving the impression of a devil or demon. Its body was so dark that I can't tell you I saw its fur, but it had to have been dark fur. It almost seemed to absorb light, which made the piercing, glowing orbs in its eye sockets even scarier to look into. I felt like those eyes were sucking the breath out of my lungs, and I know that last sentence doesn't even make sense. I literally felt my breath being sucked out into its eyes, and I fought against it by pulling my eyes away from it. It felt like I was dragging my eyes from its eyes, almost as though it were holding my gaze with invisible tightropes connecting us. The dog-headed man was outside our window, and it was enjoying us arguing. I could feel that in my belly. It was there to feed. Instead, we were all now experiencing a sense of awe and horror, viewing its presence in our backyard, looking back into our house. I saw it walk away from us, melting quickly into the darkness. It did not go poof and disappear. It just exited stage left, but I have no doubt that we were looking at the same thing my mother saw that day when she was shoveling snow. People ask me if we ever considered moving out, and I have to admit, it was the subject of some of our arguments. We couldn't afford to move, which caused a lot of tensions. I guess if we could have moved, we would have, and the fact that we couldn't almost destroyed my marriage and my family. But it all stopped one day. We did not have children, but the neighbors had 2 tween-age girls during the years when the DOGMAN and the orbs and the poltergeist activity were going on. When that family moved away, we immediately stopped experiencing strange activity. It's been 10 years since they left, and at least so far, we also haven't seen the DOGMAN again. Is it possible that DOGMAN, like poltergeists, can be manifested by young people going through puberty? How can such a thing be? And what implications might that have about what DOGMAN actually is? By now, I think you can understand why I think that what we experienced was not a natural animal. I think that we encountered the paranormal DOGMAN. Story number 4. Strange DOGMAN and Bigfoot manifestations. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was in my teenage years, I had 2 very strange experiences. Both of them happened when I was sleeping in the guest room at my grandmother's house. She's half native and not related to me by blood since she's Grandpa's second wife. My actual grandma passed before I was born, but his second wife has always been a grandmother to me. She's one of those people who talk of the paranormal as though it were an everyday thing. The first event happened when I awoke in Grandma's guest room to see my room lit up brightly. It didn't feel like it should be morning yet, so I got up and went to the bedroom window. As I drew near it, the 2 windows, which swung in like doors, burst open, and a strong gust of wind knocked me back a bit. My eyes were blinded by the intense light coming in from Grandma's backyard. Eventually, the brightness dimmed a bit, and I could see it was being generated by a craft hovering silently over the backyard. I could see the craft was landing on the grass. It was a flying disc with a glass dome on top, carrying 1 passenger that looked like Chewbacca with darker fur and bright red glowing eyes. Like Bigfoot was landing from the Bigfoot planet. I'm aware how ridiculous this all sounds. So the dome receded and Bigfoot got out, like he climbed out. He was a really tall ape-like man, but he stood up straight and tall, as though he taught posture classes or something. Then, I swear, the space Bigfoot, not wearing any clothes at all, his fur-covered man-like giant guy, looked up at me, looking down at him from the 2nd-story bedroom window. And I swear he waved at me. I waved back, and I don't remember anything after that. When I got up in the morning, though, the windows were in fact still open, and autumn leaves were all over the room, as though they had been blown in those windows. That made no sense at all, since this was the middle of summer. The second event was far creepier, if you can believe it. This happened when I was on break from college years afterward. Grandma had fallen ill and needed to be in the hospital for an extended period. I was staying at her place to watch it for her while I worked a part-time job in a town up in her area. One night, I was downstairs in her house blasting her TV. We had connected her up a nice sound system and a big screen TV for her birthday one year, but she never used any of it. While she was away, though, I was taking advantage of watching movies and TV with stereo sound up at full volume. Her closest neighbors were far enough away that I couldn't bother anyone even if I tried. So I was in sense-around heaven, munching popcorn and blissing out on whatever movies, music videos, and bands I was into in those days, and the entire outside world practically didn't even exist for me. I was sitting right next to the window looking out onto the dark backyard. Suddenly, someone was quickly there, standing directly next to the window, looming up way above me. I guess my head was about the level of this guy's chest, and he was holding his arms up and out, bent, pressing his entire body up to the glass. I looked over and toward my left, as my body instinctively recoiled in horror from that window. All time slowed down, and I remember the first thing I saw, as my eyes moved leftward, was that this guy's personality was on full display. I think you can figure out what I mean if you read between the lines. The second thing I noticed was that this guy was a hairy mother. I never saw a human being so covered in hair, and my eyes looked upward toward his chest, which was so hairy that my mind switched over from thinking of it as hairy to realizing that it was in fact furry. I do not mean furry as in a furry or a person dressed as a furry. I mean, this was an actual furry animal of some kind that I had never seen before or heard of. It stood like a man, but was covered in wavy, long, salt and pepper black and white fur. As I screamed and ran backward from the window, my eyes moved further upward to see that this broad-chested, furry, and very clearly male, man-like animal had the head of a dog. When our eyes first met, it had a curious look that quickly changed to a surprised look, then an outraged expression. Clearly, making eye contact with the creature was an error on my part. In spite of my screaming and racing in retreat, it still viewed our eye contact as a challenge. It was now barking and throwing itself against the glass, trying to get through it and get to me. I have never seen such a large animal in such a state of rage before, and as I ran away, my legs stopped working, causing me to fall forward. I was laying on the carpet, experiencing pain all over from how hard I had gone down. I was now crying both from the fall and from the fact that there was a feral dog-headed caveman trying to get into the room and end everything for me. But the dogman quieted and went away after I lay there for a while weeping. It took some time, but I found myself calming and returning to normal, able to get up to a sitting and then a standing position. I had never had my legs give out like that before. It was like the organism of my body just gave up and was ready to depart this mortal coil. I have to admit, it felt like a bit of a betrayal on the part of my legs. I started running at the gym after that. I figured I needed to do some work to regain the trust of my legs again. I hope they remember how to run, just in case we ever again come into contact with strange dogman and Bigfoot manifestations. Story number 5. The dogman that was a vampire. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story for you guys that actually happened to me. My wife says it was a dream I had, but she doesn't know because she slept through the entire thing. Here's what went down in reality. I woke up with a feeling like someone was in the room with us, but I quickly saw that it was actually someone outside the window looking in at us, or at me. It was not a man, though, and my eyes widened as my brain began to comprehend what I was looking at. Right there, right outside my window, was an upright, standing dogman walking on its hind legs. A dark-colored dog standing like a man. Well, not exactly like a man because it looked all wrong. It looked like it was going to topple over, but it didn't at the same time. I guess you could say it looked kind of like a marionette puppet show, but it was even weirder than that. Maybe if you shot a puppet show and ran it in reverse, it would begin to look as creepy and off as what I was seeing outside my window that night. This was a sad dog, a whining dog. It was staring at me and begging, sounding so forlorn. It was whining at my window, asking to be let in. I don't mean in literal words. It didn't speak English or anything. I just meant it was begging in that way that dogs do. Its eyes glowed bright red, like machine lights, like lights on the back of a car. And yet, the animal itself was unmistakably biological and alive, breathing visibly and drooling on itself. Maybe alive is the wrong word. Maybe I should have said animate or animated. It moved sometimes seeming as though it were doing so of its own volition, other times as though it were being played by an invisible puppeteer, and always Always the sounds, the eyes, all begging me to let it in. It wanted me to open the window and invite it to come into where I was lying in bed and where my wife was still sleeping. I felt this was a vampire. This thing would kill me if I invited it in. I prayed that the part of the legend about a vampire needing to be invited in was true. I stared out the window at the thing, and the thing stared in the window at me. The next thing I remember, it was morning. It was Saturday. I took a shower, got dressed, and went into town to buy extra thick curtains for all my house's ground floor windows, and a white noise machine to put on my nightstand. That vampire dogman could come back all it wanted, but if I couldn't see it, and I couldn't hear it, then would it really be there? Out of sight, out of mind is my policy when it comes to the dogman. That was a vampire. Story number 6. My wife claims we have a dogman habituation. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my wife claims we have a dogman habituation on our property. I have actually seen what she has seen, and I have an entirely different theory about it. In my opinion, we have a man who wears a dog mask and animal skins hiding around on our land. This is an ongoing situation, so it's possible we could find out something new any minute now, or that we might never be able to understand what's been happening to us. Now, when I say I have seen the same thing that my wife has seen, I should be careful to point out that this is my opinion. We have never so far seen the thing at the same time, so I suppose it is possible we have seen different entities entirely. But she describes seeing a dogman with dark fur running from behind one tree to behind another in the forest surrounding our property. What I have seen is what appears to be a human male wearing dark animal skins and a very real-looking wolf head mask, lurking around, behaving much the same way that my wife's alleged dogman behaves. The first time I saw the man or whatever he is, I was in the old wooden garage on our property. We now have a more modern garage located on the other side of our property that we keep our car in, and this old one located in the back of the yard has been used as more of a shed for literally decades. It's now too packed full of lawnmowers and stuff to fit a car into anyway. It has 2 old-fashioned looking windows in it. One looks out onto the neighbor's backyard, which demonstrates how old that garage is. It was built long before the property next door was even lived on. The other window looks out onto our backyard and the woods beyond. As I was puttering around inside, I noticed that the window behind me, the one looking out onto our property, had stopped allowing light to come in through it. Turning around, I saw why. Almost entirely filling the window was the form of the man I've already described for you. He stood about 6 feet tall. He wore a kind of a cape of dark fur and a dog-headed mask that looked just exactly like a real living dog's head. I don't know how he could see out of that mask, and it created quite an imposing vision to be staring at while cornered in a tiny old garage. I pulled back and made some horrified sound as though I were a mouse instead of a man. I was so taken aback with surprise and fear, I may as well have been nothing but a rodent. I quickly got angry at my own cowardice and that dog-masked imbecile too. I looked around for something to threaten it with. I grabbed the big pruning shears big enough to chop a dog mask off a caveman. I charged at that window with the shears, totally bluffing, but it worked. The dog-masked man ran away into the trees faster than I'd ever seen anything run. He bent and ran almost on all fours as he accelerated, grabbing trees with his arms to fling himself around. He didn't just propel himself forward by running on the ground, but by using torque generated by any solid object in his vicinity. The second time I encountered him, he was sneaking up behind me as I was messing with our garden hose. I could be wrong, but I think he was curious what I was doing. It's possible he just thought I had left my guard down, and he may have been preparing to hurt me or abduct me or something. I really felt that he wanted to understand what I was doing, though, and if that's the case, he got to find out when I turned that hose directly on him, screaming and running toward him to scare him off again. Since each appearance ended in him running away, it always seemed pointless to call the police. By the second or third call, they'd have me on the cranks list, and then I wouldn't be able to get them to come out in an actual emergency. I have to say, this dogman or caveman or whatever he is a very unpleasant kind of character. I don't know how deranged or dangerous he might be, but I'm certain he's at least annoying and unpleasant to have around. I saw him again last week, in the trees where he has no business being, and I'm convinced he's still in this area. I don't think it's Dogman, but maybe it's a nutjob who thinks he's Dogman. In either case, if he continues to put in appearances, we may have to seriously look into moving from this area, and that would create great inconveniences for both of us. Let's hope he just goes away on his own, and we never again have to deal with the man wearing a dog mask hiding on my property. Story number 7. A werewolf in our garden. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a very short and really out of the ordinary dogman story for you that is actually a wolfman or werewolf story. This monster was wearing clothes, and I think it had to be a shapeshifter because of that, but it was wearing extremely old-fashioned clothes, like something a pirate might wear in an old movie, so his appearance is even more inexplicable than a werewolf appearance might even normally be. I was sitting in my backyard with my wife soon after we bought our first home. It got dark out. We were enjoying the evening and each other, not caring how dark it became, and having no intention of going back inside anytime soon. The weather was perfect, and so was our young relationship. Very romantic scene, that's what I was thinking. This is the most romantic scene I've ever actually been inside of, that's what I was musing. And then suddenly, there was what I guess I would call a werewolf, running through the patch of woods and our garden toward us. It was the size and shape of a man, and it was wearing archaic-looking trousers torn at the cuffs. It had an old-fashioned frilly white shirt, like something the Three Musketeers might wear, open to the navel, revealing that its chest, belly, and body was entirely covered in thick gray-black fur. This horrific nightmare vision ran at us, screaming like Mel Gibson in the movie Braveheart. We ran inside, screaming like frightened children. I remember we ran up to our bedroom and locked ourselves in for the night, utterly shaken to the bone. Because of that one incident, we tried to sell the house. We continued to try to sell it for 5 years, but we found no buyers, and the dogman never came back. We ended up living there for another 14 or 15 years before a series of events developed where someone wanted to overpay us to buy the place. We got ourselves a condo and live in a nice part of the city now, which is a decision I know I will never regret. I love the fresh air of the country, that's true, but here in the city, we will never encounter a werewolf in our garden. Story number 8. Uncle Unibrow was a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story for you that's short and sweet. You can decide for yourself if it's a true werewolf story or not. Okay, so when I was a kid, my brother and I had a neighbor who was basically our best friend. We can call him Mac. The three of us were big monster movie fans, and this was the day of Chiller Theater on Channel 11 and Creature Features on Channel 5. We would take turns staying over each other's places watching monster movies on the weekends, and we collected monster movie magazines. We all knew all the details and trivia about all the old movies. We were nerds and geeks before we even heard the terms nerds and geeks. Mac had an uncle that we used to call Uncle Unibrow. We would joke that he was a werewolf, but he kind of asked for it because he was extremely unfriendly toward us. He didn't like kids, that was the rumor. We would make up all sorts of stories about Uncle Unibrow leaving his bedroom at night to hunt small game in his werewolf form. So anyway, one morning my brother and I heard a commotion outside, and it turned out Mac's parents were kicking Uncle Unibrow out of their home. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were yelling at him, and he was yelling at them. He got in his car, flipped them off, and drove away in a huff. Mac was kept inside for days, and we didn't get to talk to him alone until the next Friday. What he told us, my brother and I have never known whether to believe or not. According to Mac, Uncle Unibrow was late to breakfast that morning, and so his mom sent him up to the room to wake him up. Mac says he knocked on the door and got no answer. He knocked harder and saw that the door was open, so he pushed his head in to see what was going on. According to Mac, his uncle was passed out on his bed, wearing torn-up clothing and bare, mud-covered feet. There were footprints leading from the window across the carpet to the bed, and here's the kicker. According to Mac, the footprints looked like giant wolf tracks. Now, those of you who are movie buffs like my brother, and like me, will have already noted that Mac just described a scene from the original Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman movie. He goes out as the wolf, and he returns, leaving giant wolf tracks that lead to his own bedroom. We were both immediately suspicious of Mac's story, but when word got back to us that one of the neighbors had been missing their cat since the night when this would have allegedly happened, we've never really been certain what actually went down. We can be fairly certain that Uncle Unibrow did something that he shouldn't have. Maybe he went on a drunken rager. Maybe he really did track mud into his bedroom. He must have done something pretty bad to get kicked out of the home and the family. He never came back to visit them ever again. My brother thinks Uncle Unibrow did something that Mac was ashamed of, at least back then. He thinks that's why Mac made up the story about him turning into a werewolf and taking the neighbor's cat. He probably did something just as bad, but far more boring or sick or stupid or embarrassing or something. That's what my brother feels. I guess he's probably right, but in all the years that have passed since, I have never been lied to by Mac about anything. He's always been the most honest guy in the world. And that neighbor did lose her cat on the exact night Mac was talking about. So to me, it's still an open question as to whether we had an actual werewolf sleeping in the house next door to us back in those days. All I know is that, to this day, Mac still insists that Uncle Unibrow was a werewolf. Story number 9. The Bert and Ernie Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was a kid, I slept in the same room as my older brother. He used to tell me scary stories when I was trying to get to sleep. It'd always start with me wanting him to do it. I love the idea of scary stories, but once they get started, and they're a little too scary for me, I want to bail. So it would always reach a point where I would get too scared and ask my brother to stop telling me the story. He never would. Sometimes he would really scare me, and I would scream for my mother. There was one story, though, that was so scary, I was too afraid to cry out. He would tell me this story over and over again, and it would always give me horrible nightmares. It was the story of Bert and Ernie outside our window. It was basically just that. It was a story about me sleeping in my bed, and then I would wake up, and Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street would be outside my window, staring in, trying to get in at me. Something about these friendly TV puppets turned into undead, cannibalistic monsters was far more frightening to me than anything that might normally be considered a monster. I guess it was the betrayal of innocence or something, but That story bothered me so much that I would even have nightmares about Bert and Ernie. Bert and Ernie outside my window. Bert and Ernie beside my bed. Bert and Ernie under the bed. Bert and Ernie in the closet. Well, forget it, I said the last one. So one night I was sleeping, and then something somehow woke me up. I still had my eyes shut. I was still really tired. I had no desire to wake up, and I was trying to get back to sleep when I noticed scratching sounds. What was that, I wondered, still keeping my eyes shut? I heard the windows being scratched. It sounded as though someone were running a nail along the outside of the glass. It made a squeaking sound that kept rising in pitch until it became almost painful to hear. That was how my brothers Bert and Ernie stories would always begin. It would be about me hearing the scratching, then looking. And when I did, I would see Bert and Ernie, and I would be driven insane and sent to a mental hospital. There, the nurses would try to cure me with shock therapy, and by forcing me to live in a room filled entirely with Bert and Ernie puppets. And now, it was happening for real, unless I was imagining it. I decided I had to open my eyes and see if I was awake or asleep. Well, I opened my eyes and stared straight forward at my pillow. I was awake all right, I wasn't dreaming. I heard it again. The window was still being scratched, and I closed my eyes once more. It didn't take me too long to decide that I wanted to see what was making that noise. I didn't want to be scared if I didn't have to be, so I needed to find out what was making that sound. Maybe it was just a tree branch. If so, then I was wasting energy on being scared when I could have been sleeping. I braced myself and sat up, facing the window, but with my eyes still clenched shut in cowardice. I counted to 3 in my head, then I opened my eyes, really truly expecting to see Bert and Ernie outside my window, staring back at me with cold, dead puppet expressions. What I actually saw instead was so much worse. I went into shock and needed to be hospitalized afterward. What I saw when I opened my eyes was a dog, but it was also a man. It stood there in the darkness with glowing, bright, demonic eyes, looking in at me, looking me right in my eyes, and making it hurt in the back of my head somehow. This thing was the size of my dad or larger, but it had dog ears up on top of its head. It was mainly in silhouette, but I could see that it had a head, like a deformed wolf, and it seemed to be fur-covered like a canine. It was standing on its hind legs and using one of its claws on its right front paw to scratch a line into the window. That's all I remember, as I seemed to have blacked out and blanked out much of the next month or 2 of my life. I remember I was in a hospital for a while, and I remember my brother was blamed for all of it, with his scary stories. He still to this day acts guilty around me. We avoid each other outside of holidays as a result, but I don't blame him. I do know that when things got back to normal and I was back home in my room, I checked that window I had dreamed that I saw the DOGMAN outside of. It actually did have a long scratch on the outside, exactly where I had dreamed seeing the monster do it. Maybe the doctors are wrong, and I didn't dream it. Maybe I actually did see the Bert and Ernie DOGMAN. And now our final story for today, number 10. The Man-Headed Dog. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I know that you have a lot of stories about dog-headed men. I have a story my uncle used to tell about something similar but different. What my Uncle Terry saw was a man-headed dog. He would only tell the story when it was late at night and he'd been drinking. It was so terrifying to him that he would be crying by the middle of each retelling. By the end, he would collapse into tears and then he'd go off to bed. This story was always the closer to holiday and birthday celebrations when Uncle Terry was in town. So the story begins when Uncle Terry was walking home from a pub in County Kerry, Ireland. Those kinds of stories usually involve the inebriated fellow encountering a leprechaun, showing him a pot of gold or something, but that's not what Uncle Terry told us he saw. There was a patch of woods alongside one street he was walking on his way home that moonlit night. There used to be a home there, but not anymore, and the woods had overtaken the land in the meantime. In those trees, Uncle Terry said he heard the sound of a dog whimpering. Uncle Terry had always loved dogs and animals in general. He worked for a few years in his youth as a veterinary assistant in Dublin, and he hated the thought of an animal suffering. So he took a few steps into those dark woods, looking around and listening carefully to hear where that dog-like sound had come from, and if it indeed was a dog in distress. After hearing the sound one more time, Terry made his way toward it, and then, behind a bush, he found the source of it all. And this is where his eyes would well up with tears, and his voice would begin to go shaky. It was a kind of a pit bull terrier, he told us. It was like a dog's body standing there, proud chest out. Its fur on the sides and in the back was a mottled dark brown, but on its chest it was far lighter. Where the dog's head should have been, there was nothing. No neck, no dog head. On the chest area, though, there was a flattened, very human-like face. Uncle Terry would have to pause at this point in the story to weep. The eyes on the thing's chest looked at him, he claimed, and he saw its lips tremble as it made that whining sound, like it was begging him for something. Uncle Terry's mind snapped. He told us that he ran away screaming and checked himself into a mental hospital the next morning, where he ended up staying for 90 days. He still, to this day, claims it had to have been mental illness, temporary insanity fueled by the drink, which caused this vision to appear before him. But get him alone, and he will confess to you quietly that he's pretty sure what he saw was real. There was some man, he thinks, that was somehow cursed or bewitched or trapped inside that headless dog body. That's the way his mind went with this. He's convinced he saw evidence that sorcery is real. It made him feel smaller, realizing that such things could happen to a man, and made him think less of himself because he did nothing to relieve the poor cursed man in that dog body. He says he wishes he could believe the doctors that this was all an illusion, because then he would have no reason to feel so terribly about what he witnessed. But Uncle Terry, deep down, suspects that he really, genuinely, definitively saw the man-headed dog. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LES-SCARY. That's 804 LESCARY or 804-537-2279.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.